units in the West Bank or the occupied West Bank, defying international law. The reactions have been harsh, but short of any action, at least as of yet. In this edition of the debate, we'll discuss Israel's continued illegal settlement activities and whether the new U.S. administration under Trump will support the regime and its illegal activities in the occupied West Bank, like moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem outlets.
There seems to be no end in sight to Israel's expansionist policy as Tel Aviv unveils a new plan to build new settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. On Tuesday, Israel approved 2,500 settler units in the West Bank, which drew strong international reactions. The United Nations denounced the decision as an obstacle to peace with Palestinians.
For the Secretary General, there is no plan B for a two-state solution. In this regard, any unilateral decision that can be an obstacle to the two-state goal is of grave concern for the Secretary General.
The European Union also slammed the construction plan.
It's regrettable that Israel is proceeding with this policy despite the continuous serious international concern and objections which have been constantly raised at all levels.
A prominent Palestinian official blasted the move as a declaration of war and peace.
The Israeli declaration of 2,500 new settlement units in the occupied territories is nothing but a declaration of war on peace, a declaration of war on two-state solution. This means that Israeli government is determined to violate international law and the most recent resolution of United Nations Security Council 2334.
Israel's building permits prompted Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations, Riyad Mansour, to send letters to the UN, urging the international community to unequivocally reject and condemn such illegal Israeli actions and provocations. Despite widespread condemnations, the spokesman for the White House refused to make comments on the issue, as he was asked about Donald Trump's perspective on the Israeli plan to further expand settlements.
Israel continues to be a huge ally of the United States. He wants to grow closer with Israel to make sure that it gets the full respect that it deserves in the Middle East.
The approval of 2,500 settler units marks a major settlement expansion following Trump's election. The administration of former U.S. President Barack Obama grew frustrated with Israeli settlement building. The United States, in a rare move, declined to veto a December 23rd UN Security Council resolution condemning Israeli settlement building, allowing it to pass 14-0. The pro-Israeli policies of the Trump administration, including his promise to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem al-Quds, are expected to embolden the regime to press ahead with its illegal construction activities in the occupied territories and create more tensions in the region.
Our guest joining us for this edition of the debate, we have Richard Millett, who's a journalist and political commentator, joining us from London. And also we have Alison Weir, Executive Director of If Americans Knew, who joins us from Berkeley. I'd like to welcome you both. And Richard Millett, first let me get a reaction from you on the news of Israel's approval of the construction of 2,500 new settler units in the occupied West Bank and 3,000 since Trump came into power.
Well, I mean, these are homes that people need to live in. Everyone needs, if you have a community, if you have a village, if you live in a town, if you live in a city, then obviously things need expanding. You need more homes for families, you need more schools, shops, kindergartens. You just can't stop life continuing. Now, there were, as we know, as you well know, there were 1.5 million Israeli Arabs or Israeli Palestinians, however you would like to describe them, living in Israel. Almost 20%, or we'll say about 15 to 20% of Israel is non-Jewish. It's Arab, it's Muslim, many Arab Muslims, some Arab Christian. So what on earth is the problem with Jews living on the West Bank, which is historically to the Jewish people, Judea and Samaria. This is how Israel would see it. This is how Israel would argue it. For the last 3,000 years, there's been Jewish people living in that area on the West Bank. Only for 19 years, between 1948 and 1967, when Jews were ethnically cleansed from that area. Were there no Jews living there? This is how Israel sees it. It's doing nothing wrong. And for the last 8 years, Obama has been vehemently against Israel in every respect. And now they have a slightly more favourable presidency. And obviously, after the last 8 years under Obama, they're going to take advantage of that warmer atmosphere towards Israel.
Let's see what Alison Weir thinks about your statements. Go ahead, Alison Weir.
Thank you. I didn't, because of technical difficulties, I didn't hear all of the statements. But what I heard was extremely inaccurate and it just misrepresents the situation. In reality, these settlements are illegal. That's been stated again and again under international law. They're illegal under the Hague Convention of 1907, the Sixth Convention. They're illegal under the Geneva Convention, Protection of Civilians, of Article 47 of, I believe, 1947. They're illegal under Security Council Resolution 242, and most recently under the latest Security Council resolutions. Remember, Security Council resolutions have the force of international law. These are now legally, supposedly binding. 2339 also calls these a flagrant violation of international law, which is what they are. This most recent move by Benjamin Netanyahu is really provocative, very foolish, and it has been condemned by not only the EU, many Israelis have condemned it. Even the American Jewish Committee, which is extremely pro-Israel, has condemned it as not helpful. It's a power play by Netanyahu, pandering to certain portions of the Israeli right wing, but it won't go over well. It will provoke more distrust of Israel, more hostility towards Israel. Certainly, many Americans are waking up to what Israel's doing, and this will be seen as extremely provocative, violation of law and of morality. It's astounding to see it going forward.
Well, let's go back to a few weeks ago, Richard Millett, and I'd like to get your reaction regarding that vote that took place at the UN. Tell us what you thought about that. I don't know if you saw it when the voting did take place and the hands were raised and how Americans voted, or the American, I should say, ambassador voted, and then the applause that followed that. Why do you think that happened in the form and manner that it did, which required Israel to reprimand practically all of its different, I guess, member embassies from around the world in Israel?
Well, if you're talking about the vote at the United Nations, yes. Well, as we know, that member states at the United Nations all have their own vested interests. Israel is a tiny state compared to the many states of the Arab and Muslim world. There's a lot of business done between these countries. All of a sudden, New Zealand came in and suddenly decided that it wanted to get this resolution up and running. New Zealand sells a lot of its products to the Arab countries. United Nations is just a hypocritical talking shop, really, where everyone votes for their own interests. It's one tiny Jewish state that they can kind of wave it away. They've got to get their own interests brought to the forefront. So obviously they're going to vote against the Jewish state. And we know about Obama's hostility towards Israel. It's not surprising that he vetoed, he didn't veto that resolution. And listening to my colleague here, the settlements aren't illegal. There's certainly been no court decision. She might quote from various conventions, and her view is that they're illegal, but they're not illegal. There's no, in fact, there's a French court that says that the settlements are actually legal. So, and to say that the American people are waking up to Israel. And funnily, it's how ironic that the American people have just voted in a president who, as we know, is now very pro-Israel. So I'm not quite sure whether what she says really stacks up based on the evidence.
Alison Weir, go ahead.
Well, I live here. I'm an American. I live in the United States. And I'm very aware. I speak around the country quite a bit. I meet people from diverse political backgrounds. And there's a great deal more information, awareness, and knowledge of what Israel is doing in the last 16 years than there was previously. When people learn those facts, they're extremely unhappy with what's going on and the fact that Americans, because of our politicians from both parties, give Israel over $10 million per day. That upsets Americans. Most people now are that know that fact, question it. And in terms of the statement that no court has found it illegal, that's just not true. An Israeli court agreed that the Hague Conventions applied to Israel, that the Geneva Conventions apply to Israel. Israel is a signatory of the Geneva Conventions. The International Court of Justice in 2004 found that the settlements were illegal. So there's no question of the illegality. It's simply that Israel has a very powerful lobby around the world, and especially in the United States, also in England. And so far, politicians, not surprisingly, pander to lobbies. This is one of the lobbies that they pander to in the United States. As a result, we've had policies that are very questionable. That's the reality. But one final word is the allegation that that Obama was opposed to Israel is just not true. He did finally mildly uphold some of the international law in regard to Israel, but he continued to support Israel. He made many statements that were supportive of Israel. Under the Obama administration, there's now a plan where we're going to give Israel, what is it, I think $38 billion over the next 10 years. This is not hostility. This is, quite supportive of Israel by the Obama administration.
Well, let's see here. Let's, if we can review, Richard Millett, some of the, unless you have a reaction to Alison Weir, review some of the statements that have come out in reaction to the announcement of the Israeli illegal settler homes that are going to be built. The EU reaction, it said that it seriously undermines the prospects for peace. UN reaction decried Israel's approval of the construction. A quote for the Secretary General, there is no plan B for the two-state solution. That we're going to talk about that in a minute, hopefully. What about the U.S. reaction in that press conference? I don't know if you saw that. And you said that, okay, this administration with Trump, well, they're behind Israel. Why was there no reaction, or no comments, I should say, from the U.S. Press Secretary there when asked about it?
If I can just go back to what my colleague said, if this idea that there's a strong American pro-Israel lobby in America and the UK, again, if that's the case, then why did Obama choose not to veto the resolution 2334, and why did the UK vote in favour of 2334? If the lobbies were so strong, then that just wouldn't have happened. The settlements are just one part of the issue here. Everyone sort of fixates on the settlements. Will my colleague condemn continued Palestinian terrorism against innocent Israelis? A few days after UN Resolution 2334, someone, an Israeli Arab, unfortunately, or an East Jerusalem Arab, drove a truck into a group of young Israeli soldiers, 20-year-old soldiers, and killed 4 of them and disabled many of them for life. We hear Mahmoud Abbas, who constantly talks about if Jews go up to the Temple Mount, it will degrade the blood of the Jews, or the feet of the Jews, whatever the horrendous expression he used was. Well, degrade the mosques around that area in East Jerusalem. Now, this is, we see constant incitement to violence on Palestinian Authority television. We see children saying that they want to grow up to become suicide bombers, killing innocent Israelis. This is really the heart, this is the crux of the problem, the constant incitement against innocent Israelis and Hamas, which likes to fire rockets into Israel, and the constant fear of the Israelis. The average Israeli wants a two-state solution. The average Israeli would like to see a Palestinian state living in peace alongside an Israeli state, but the average Israeli, and I speak to many of them, just cannot, are fearful that if a Palestinian state was built alongside Israel, that it would be possibly lead to horrendous war and bloodshed on both sides.
Well, you talked about the two-state solution there, but Alison Weir, is that still even possible, even though Richard Millett paints the Palestinians as being the aggressors and the Israelis being the victims?
Well, again, he has it a bit backwards. Israelis have killed far more civilians than Palestinians have. If people go to our website, they can see a timeline that lists every Israeli and every Palestinian killed, tragically killed, since 2000. And there you can see the details of the quantity from both populations and when they were killed. And it's far more Palestinian civilians killed than Israeli civilians. The recent truck bomb ramming is quite questionable. It appears likely that the driver was shot and then lost control of his vehicle. That's also come out in the Israeli media. Rockets have killed a total of Palestinian rockets in the past about a dozen years since they've been shot, have killed approximately 30 people. These are rockets from Gaza that have killed about 30 Israelis. The Israeli forces during that same time have killed 4,000 Gazans. The numbers on this are very, very clear. In terms of the two-state solution, the two-state solution right now would have Israel getting about 85% of Palestine and the Palestinians down to 15% or perhaps less. It's a very strange two-state solution. Most people would think it would be 50-50, but it's far from that. Now, he asked why the U.S. administration did allow this most recent Security Council resolution condemning the settlements to pass. That is because the smart Israel partisans, the smart Zionists, the ones who understand strategy, realize that the so-called two-state solution would be wonderful for Israel and they should grab it while they can, so that they can get 85, perhaps 90% of Palestine and have an ethnically preferential Jewish state. So the smart Zionists are now in favor of this so-called Jewish state, and for that reason I feel the resolution was allowed to pass. The greedier ones, the ones with less understanding of the situation in the United States and internationally, think that Israel can just grab it all. They're the ones that are pushing for more settlements. And from the Israeli point of view, that's probably a very foolish move. It probably is unwise, and that's why there is a great deal of opposition to Netanyahu.
Well, let's get your reaction, Richard Millett, on what seems to be on the agenda of Donald Trump, and that is the fact that he wants to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem Al-Quds. Now, tell your thoughts on this, because obviously the backlash coming from the Palestinian Authority, from the Palestinians, and from many, from all corners of the world, is the fact that that would just kill any type of perhaps of a peace process that could even get started again between Palestinians and Israel. What do you think that would do to that?
Well, I mean, on a simple basis, I don't see what the problem is moving the the Israeli embassy to, the American embassy, even to, even some of the embassies to East Jerusalem. There's a Palestinian embassy in the Vatican, and is a concern, possible concern at this stage, with the incitement and the violence taking place with the car rammings and the stabbings against innocent Israelis going about their normal business inside Israel from Palestinians and some Israeli Arabs as well. This is Israelis are constantly in constant fear at the moment, just walking to work or going home and being rammed by a vehicle and being killed. This has happened frequently over the last couple of months in Israel, and certainly towards the end of last year. And I actually do think that Bibi Netanyahu is concerned about actually having that. I don't think he's necessarily come out and said, yes, it's got to happen, it's got to happen. I think we've seen, as press conference you're referring to, I think they've, as the Trump administration has been saying, they're in the very early process of
I'm sorry to
talking
jump in.
about
I
it
just
at
got
the moment.
We only have 30 seconds left. Richard Millett, I apologize. Same question to you, Alison. We have 30 seconds only. Please, thank you.
I think Donald Trump will not end up moving it there. Like all the presidents from both parties, he will see that it's an inappropriate move, and the indications are now that he won't actually move it there. There's pressure on him to do so, so that's of concern. There's strong pressure for him to move it, but the most recent indications are that that will not happen. Ronald Reagan, who was a Republican president, condemned such a move and threatened that he would veto any U.S. legislation requiring it. Presidents are not in favor of it. I don't think Trump will be either, despite the fact that there's so much pressure from one portion of the Israel lobby on him to make that move.
Okay, thank you. We're going to end it there. Alison Weir, Executive Director of If Americans Need. Do check out our website. And also Richard Millett, thank you, journalist and political commentator there from London. Thanks so much for tuning in to another edition of The Debate from Mikhail Vitaly and the entire team in the capital, Tehran. It's goodbye.